The sun was dipping low when I rode into the rancher's spread. Dust clung to my boots, my hat brim heavy with heat. The place sprawled wide, a fortress of timber and stone in the middle of prairie grass that stretched farther than a man could see. Smoke curled from the chimney, the smell of beef and wood smoke mixing in the dry air. I'd been summoned, and I knew better than to keep a man like Amos Brant waiting. He was the kind who owned more cattle than some towns had people, and his word was law for miles in every direction. Men spoke his name in low voices, as though he could hear them across a canyon. I tied my horse at the rail, patted her neck to settle her nerves, then climbed the wide steps up to his house. The doors opened before I could knock. Brant himself stood there, tall, thick around the shoulders, with a silver mustache that glinted in the last of the light. His eyes were sharp, the kind that measured a man before he spoke. "You came," he said, more statement than greeting. "I was told to," I replied. He grunted, then stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the air was cooler, though it carried the faint smell of leather and whiskey. The parlor was wide, rugs from back east spread across the floor, antlers mounted on the walls. This was no humble rancher's cabin, it was a palace built on cattle and control. Brant poured himself a drink, sat heavy in a chair and motioned for me to sit across. I didn't. I stayed standing. He studied me, then leaned forward. "You've been around these parts near 2 years. Folks say you're a hard worker. Keep your word, know how to handle a horse and a rifle. That right?" "I reckon." "Good." He sipped his drink, then set it down. "That's why I've decided you'll marry my daughter." The words hit like a hammer. My chest tightened, though I kept my face steady. "Beg pardon?" I asked. He leaned back, unfazed. "Marry my daughter. Simple as that. You'll take her hand, and with it, you'll have a stake in this ranch. Land, cattle, a place among men who matter." My jaw worked, but no words came. I'd never thought of myself as the marrying kind, not tied down to anyone's land or family. But this wasn't an offer, it was an order. "And if I refuse?" I asked. Brant's eyes narrowed. "You won't. A man don't turn down what I put on the table. Not unless he wants to find the ground under his boots taken out from him." The parlor door creaked. I turned, and there she was, his daughter, Clara. She was striking, no doubt about it. Tall, with chestnut hair pinned neat, eyes like cold water. Her dress was fine, pale blue, the kind a rancher's daughter wore to church, not to walk across dusty floors. She carried herself like someone who had learned to hide her feelings well. Her gaze swept over me, quick and sharp, before landing on her father. "You didn't tell me you'd decided already," she said, her voice level. "A man's got to make choices for his family," Brant said. "You'll wed him, and that's the end of it." Clara's eyes flicked back to me, steady but not welcoming. I saw no warmth there, only duty or maybe defiance buried under calm. But before I could speak, my eyes caught something else. Behind her, in the shadow of the hallway, a figure lingered. A girl. She was dressed in plain calico, sleeves worn thin, hair dark and tangled. But what struck me wasn't her ragged clothes or her wary eyes. It was the chain that bound her wrist, iron glinting in the lamplight. She lowered her gaze when she saw me notice, retreating into the darkness like a ghost. Something twisted in my chest. Brant didn't notice or didn't care. He raised his glass again. "You'll have your answer by tomorrow, but I expect the right one." I nodded once, stiff. My throat was dry, words stuck. But all I could think of was the girl in the shadows, the girl in chains. The next morning I walked the grounds of Brant's ranch, trying to clear the grit from my head. The weight of his words hung heavy. Marry his daughter, or lose everything I'd built here. I had no roots in this country. Just a saddle, a horse, and a reputation for doing honest work. but something in the man's tone told me he wasn't offering me a life, he was giving me a cage. I wandered toward the barn. The smell of hay and manure was a comfort compared to the polished halls of Brant's house. My boots crunched on straw as I stepped inside. That's when I saw her, the girl from the hallway. She was bent over a bucket, scrubbing the floor with raw hands, her wrist shackled by a short length of chain fastened to a barn beam. The morning light cut through cracks in the wood, laying stripes of gold across her face. She froze when she noticed me, her dark eyes sharp and guarded. I cleared my throat softly. "Mornin'." She didn't answer, just dipped her rag back into the water and kept scrubbing. I crouched a few steps away, careful not to crowd her. Up close, I saw the marks on her wrist where iron rubbed skin raw. Her hair was long, tangled, but her face, though tired, carried a strength I couldn't ignore. "You work here?" I asked. A foolish question. Of course she worked here. Her lips pressed tight before she finally muttered, "Work ain't the word." Her voice was soft, low, with a trace of accent I couldn't place. I hesitated, then asked the thing burning at me since last night. "Why the chain?" She looked up at me for the first time then. Her eyes were deep brown, tired but burning with something fierce. "Why do you think?" she said, her voice sharper now. Before I could answer, the barn door creaked. One of Brant's foremen entered, a thick man with a crooked nose. His eyes narrowed when he saw me near her. "You ain't got business here," he barked. "This one don't speak to nobody unless Mr. Brant says so." The girl lowered her head quickly, back to her scrubbing, as if she'd never spoken at all. I rose slowly, forcing calm into my voice. Didn't know talking was against the rules. The foreman stepped closer, close enough I could smell tobacco on his breath. "You best learn the rules quick, cowboy. Brant's word keeps this place running. Step out of line, you'll find yourself out on the road or worse." We stared at each other for a moment, dust motes dancing in the light between us. Then he spat into the hay and walked off, slamming the barn door behind him. The girl didn't look up again, but as I turned to leave, I heard her whisper, so faint I almost thought I imagined it. "Be careful." I paused at the door, my hand tightening on the wood. Then I walked out into the blinding sun, heart hammering harder than it had any right to. This wasn't just about a forced marriage anymore. There was something darker at work on this ranch, and I couldn't shake the image of her chained wrist, nor the quiet warning in her voice. By the time evening fell, I couldn't shake the barn from my mind. The image of that girl scrubbing floors with a chain at her wrist, eyes flashing fire even as she whispered caution, followed me like a ghost. I told myself to forget it, to keep my head down. But that was easier said than done. As I stood outside the house, the lamps flickering through lace curtains, the door opened and Clara stepped out. She still wore the pale blue dress, though the day had left dust at the hem. Her hair had come loose from its pins, falling soft around her shoulders. "You walk the grounds like you're already master here," she said, her tone cool though not cruel. "Just stretching my legs," I replied. Her gaze sharpened. "You don't have to pretend with me. I know what my father told you." I studied her face. For all her beauty, there was a weariness in her eyes, like someone who'd lived too long under another's shadow. "And what do you think of it?" I asked. She gave a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. "What do I think of being ordered to wed a stranger? To smile while father hands me off like a brood mare?" She looked past me, toward the darkening prairie. "I think it's a fine way to remind me I've never been free a day in my life." Her words hit sharper than I expected. For the first time, I saw her not as Brant's daughter, not as the prize he dangled, but as someone trapped in her own way. "I didn't ask for this either," I said quietly. "I know," she answered, softer now, "and I don't blame you. But understand this, refusing him isn't a choice, not without cost." I shifted, uneasy. I've faced cost before. She turned her gaze back to me, steady. Not like this. For a moment we stood in silence, cicadas humming in the brush, the sky bleeding orange into violet. Then she said, almost in a whisper, "I saw you looking at her." My breath caught. Who? Her lips curved, not quite a smile, more like a wound reopening. The girl in chains. You noticed her, didn't you? I didn't answer, but I didn't need to. Clara looked away, gripping her shawl tighter. My father keeps her like that because it pleases him to. She belonged to no one when she came here, and he decided she belonged to him. She's strong, stubborn, she fought him once. That's why he keeps the chain. The words made my fists clench. Clara stepped closer, her voice low, urgent. If you care about her, you'll leave her alone. Don't speak to her, don't look at her. Father watches everything. If he even suspects she trailed off, but the fear in her eyes said enough. I met her gaze, my chest tight. And what about you? What do you want? She blinked, startled, then gave a bitter smile. What I want doesn't matter. Not here. Her hand brushed mine just for a second, as if to anchor her warning in me. Then she stepped back, her eyes already shuttered again. Think carefully, she said, her voice cool once more. About her. About me. About what happens if you choose wrong. Then she slipped back inside, leaving me on the porch, with the weight of her truth pressing down like the night itself. And all I could think of was the girl's eyes in the barn, how even chained. She'd looked freer than Clara had just now. The nights out on Brant's ranch were quiet, in a way that pressed on a man's chest. Coyotes yipped somewhere out on the rim of the prairie, and the wind carried the dry rattle of mesquite branches. I couldn't sleep. Not with Clara's warning in my ears, and the memory of the chained girl's eyes fixed in my mind. So I found myself walking the path toward the barn again, every step weighed down with risk. If Brant or his men caught me out here, they'd string me up for less. But I kept walking, boots crunching soft in the dirt, until I reached the wooden doors. Inside, the air smelled of hay and horses, warm and familiar. She was there, just as I'd hoped. Sitting on a bale of straw, chain looped around her wrist, her head resting against the wall as if she'd been listening to the silence itself. Her eyes opened when I stepped inside. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. I know. Then why are you? I hesitated, then spoke the truth. Because I couldn't keep from it. Her lips parted, surprise flickering across her tired face. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she motioned for me to sit across from her. I lowered myself onto the straw, close enough to see her clearly in the lantern light, far enough that I wouldn't spook her. What's your name? I asked. She studied me before answering, as though measuring whether I deserved the gift of it. Elena. Elena, I repeated, soft. The name sat right in my chest. Her eyes darted toward the door. If they find you here, they won't, I cut in. Not tonight. She exhaled, slow. Then she looked at me again, and something inside her seemed to loosen. I wasn't born here, she said quietly. I came north with a wagon train. We were promised work, land maybe. But we were attacked. Some taken, some killed. I ran, thought I'd escaped. But Brant's men found me. He said I owed him for his mercy. That was 2 years ago. Her voice cracked, just a little, and she swallowed it down like it burned. Anger boiled in me. So he chained you. Like an animal. Her jaw tightened. I don't let him break me. He thinks the iron keeps me small, but he doesn't know. Doesn't know what? That I still dream, she said, eyes fierce now, of running, of crossing the canyon where the grass grows tall and no one knows my name. The silence between us filled with her words, the weight of them. I leaned forward slightly. You won't always be chained. Her gaze snapped to mine, sharp, searching. And who'll see to that? You? I didn't answer. But I didn't look away either. For a moment, her expression softened, and something fragile passed between us. Then a sound outside broke it, the crunch of boots, the creak of the barn door shifting. Her eyes widened. She yanked her wrist, the chain clinking, and hissed, "Go! Now!" I slipped into the shadows, ducking behind the tack wall as the door swung open. A lantern glow swept the barn. One of Brant's men stood in the entry, peering inside. "Everything quiet," he muttered, though no one was meant to answer. Elena bent her head, pretending to work the rag over the floor. The chain clinked in steady rhythm, her face calm, betraying nothing. After a long, tense moment, the man grunted and left, the door groaning shut behind him. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Elena looked toward the shadows where I hid. Our eyes met again, a spark of danger and something more. "You see now?" she whispered. "This isn't safe." "No," I said, stepping out into the dim lantern glow. "But it's worth it." For the first time, a real smile flickered across her face, small but alive, and in that moment, I knew I was already too far gone to turn back. The parlor felt smaller with every breath, Brant's anger filling the walls like smoke. Elena had been dragged off, the echo of her chains fading down the hall, but her eyes stayed with me. Eyes that told me she'd rather burn than bow. Brant poured himself another glass, hand steady as stone. "Think hard, boy. You marry Clara, you'll have everything. Refuse, and you'll watch that girl disappear into a place worse than hell. It's simple." Clara's knuckles whitened against her skirt. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw pity in her eyes, not for herself, but for me, for Elena. The silence stretched, heavy and cruel. My mind burned with 1,000 choices, none of them clean. At last I spoke. My voice was low, steady, though my chest was pounding. "I'll give you my answer in the morning." Brant smirked, satisfied. "Good. Sleep on it. You'll see sense." But as I turned and walked out into the night, the cool air hit me like water, clearing the haze of his power. I knew there was no answer that could satisfy him, not one I could live with. Clara stepped out onto the porch behind me, her voice barely above a whisper. "He'll never let her go." I stopped, the weight of the stars heavy over the dark prairie. "I know." She hesitated, then added, "But you still mean to try." I looked back at her. She didn't smile, didn't nod, but in her silence, I read the truth. She might never escape her father's shadow, but she understood. Maybe she even hoped I would succeed, if not for myself, then for Elena. I tipped my hat, then headed down the steps, boots crunching in the dirt. The night stretched wide and endless before me. Somewhere beyond those walls, Elena sat chained, waiting. Brant thought he had me cornered, thought he could bend me to his will. But he hadn't reckoned on the one thing he couldn't chain, my heart. And as I walked into the darkness, I swore I'd come back for her no matter the cost.